Hi, I'm Yoav Heller. I'm the chairman of Rivon Revi'i, the fourth quarter, the biggest grassroots political organization in Israel. And this is 18 questions, 40 Israeli thinkers from 1840.
We'll begin where we always do. As an Israeli and as a Jew, how are you feeling at this moment in Israeli history?
I feel a lot of responsibility because I think we are in an era where we need a lot of historical awareness of the simple fact, and it tells us also in the Mishnah, that we are one generation, that in the past there were many generations, and that we are preparing the future. And within that chain, we have the responsibility, on the one hand, to understand that we're not going to solve everything, but on the other hand, that we have a lot of work to do in order to promise that the state of Israel will celebrate 100 years for the first time in history.
Did you always feel that sense of responsibility? When did that begin?
I think from my childhood, I grew up in a home with a lot of historical awareness.
Where did you grow up?
Okay, and that's the second reason. I grew up in many environments. I grew up in Nigeria and Africa, then in Atlanta, Georgia, then in Menachamia, it's in the far, far north of Israel, then in Zichron Yaakov. So these are very diverse backgrounds, because on some of them, for example, in Atlanta, I learned in a Orthodox, almost ultra-Orthodox school, in a very secular home. Menachamia is a very, very right-wing, very far, very distant village where my family was Mapainikim, was labor, and so on and so on. So I always had a very big awareness of the Jewish people, the people of Israel, and I wanted to connect my friends from different environments. It was very hard. So I said, one day, that will be my mission, to connect all of the people of Israel. And I didn't know it. I was serious. It was not like being a firefighter when you promise yourself in the age of 5.
What do you think has been Israel's greatest success and greatest mistake in the war against Hamas?
I want to expand it because I think the greatest success in the war in the north, we've changed the Middle East. In many ways, we've defeated Hezbollah. We've defeated the Shia axis. We've created a totally new condition in the north that could actually change the trajectory of the Middle East. So that's a huge success. The failure is in Gaza, I think. What's the failure in Gaza? I can point on a specific moment. I think after Sinwar and Def were killed, we should have announced there that we won, that we're negotiating the end of the war, and basically that we will not allow any rehabilitation of Gaza if Hamas is still in power. But for us, we did our job. We took down the leaders, we took down Hamas, and now we want the hostages back. And if you want a rehabilitation, you will need to bring a new force. If not, we'll continue fighting you, but on our conditions. Once we didn't do that, it's going to be very hard to finish the war, bring the hostages back, and actually declare victory. Just the last sentence, we want the exile of the leaders of Hamas right now. But back then, we had a much bigger success. We killed them. We didn't need to exile them. But now we're creating a new leadership for Hamas. So this is worrying, I think.
Why do you think that hasn't happened?
First of all, I think this is not mathematics. I don't think, I think a lot of Israelis from the opposition think this government is doing things deliberately for political reasons and so on. I don't think that's the matter. I think there are two problems. One, Prime Minister Netanyahu historically is someone who does not make decisive decisions. He likes things to unfold themselves. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's a very bad idea. I think that's one. The nature of his leadership is, let's postpone. The second thing is that I'm not sure that the Israeli government and maybe even the army establishment in many ways had a plan of what do we do, what is the end game of this war if we're not able to fully defeat every terrorist in Gaza, because basically Hamas we've defeated. This goes back to many mistakes that we've done in the beginning of the war. I think they should be much more decisive. I think the humanitarian aid was a big mistake, and so on and so on. So that's why I think these are the two reasons. It's not decisive, and I think once you do not create clear parameters of what is victory, what is half victory, or what is defeat, you have a hard time to end this affair.
How do you think October 7th has changed Israeli society?
First of all, I tell Israelis, I think I'm also an historian. And I think as an historian, you cannot predict after 2 years how it has changed. Many Israelis will tell you it did not change. Depressed, they will tell you that. I think they're mistaken. There's a big change. So the more apparent is people became more hawkish on defense-wise, but I think that's a long-lasting process. I think something in the deep psychology of Israeli society has changed. We feel more fragile, on the one hand, because of what happened. On the other hand, I think people are much more aware to the righteousness of our cause and understanding that we failed with the never again promise, but on the other hand, we don't have any other choice. So I think the awareness of why do we need the state of Israel? Why do we need the Jewish state? Why do we need the relationship with the Jewish diaspora is totally going to change. The thing I hope is going to change is the understanding that the internal relationships within Israel, between Israeli citizens, and specifically between Jewish Israeli citizenship, it's what's going to actually predict the resilience of the state. And that, you could say that there was a phase we all thought it changed. Now we're in a phase that we're more skeptic. I think in the big picture, that's going to be the biggest change. But that will take a bit more time.
So I'm also very curious. I know that Haravan Revi'i, the fourth quarter, tries to create a very wide tent between really including all Israelis and everyone across Israeli society. But how do you negotiate how do you negotiate the differences when there are some that are irreconcilable? Let's say, for example, views on the war, on the hostage deals, on Netanyahu, who still has very wide support across Israeli society and who has very strong opposition that is very vocal and firmly against him.
First of all, it's important to say that Rivon Revi'i, the fourth quarter, was established when Bennett was prime minister. For the war, before the judicial reform, whatever. Why is it important? Because once again, to show the historical perspective where we saw that the Israeli society is becoming more and more fragmented, that polarization is higher and higher, and the Israeli citizen does not understand that this will actually lead to a potential cold or hot civil war, and that we're not in Switzerland, that our enemies will take use of that. So once you have that historical perspective, you understand that even Bibi Netanyahu is just a point, a dot in history. History will continue after him. And that every specific affair that you think cannot be overcome right now, it is a result that, not all, but 60-70% of Israelis can agree upon it, but because of polarization, and why don't we add here a term, emotional polarization is what's strong here. Israelis are actually moderate Israelis. Moderate, 60-70% Israelis are moderate, cannot agree upon everything because everything is yes Bibi, no Bibi. So the solution is to actually create a wide base, grassroots, because anything you will not try to do top down too quickly, you will not be able to do political change. And that grassroots actually creates an apparatus where you can bring more and more people and create methodologies of broad consensus. And how do you solve crises and so on? Once we're now almost 200,000 people, once we'll get to 1 million people, diverse, and we're quite diverse right now, with proofs, and we have already some proofs, for example, our roadmap to constitutions that we could create broad consensus, I think then political change also can happen.
So one of the things that you mentioned is this idea that Israel can be an existential peril if Israeli society continues to fragment. But when I think on both the more, let's say, center to left and the more right, both view that there are currently existential issues. For those who are more liberal or maybe some more center or even on the right, and I don't want to generalize so strongly, the hostage issue is the defining issue for Israel right now, and we can't think about anything in the future. And then for those on the right, there really is the question of until we have complete control of Gaza, until Hamas is completely annihilated, anything else is cucumber issues. It's going to come and go and it's irrelevant. For those types of people, are those not in the 60-70%? What do you say to those people if they come to a fourth quarter seminar or to a fourth quarter workshop?
Okay, you chose the hostage specifically issue or the Gaza issue.
Yeah. Meaning, and I choose those just to clarify because I think that for many people, depending on where they fall politically, either of those issues is viewed as the most important issue to the future of the state of Israel today.
Yes. So I think it varies, but I will say so because I think the hostage is extremely, and also the Gaza affair is extremely important. I would say the following. I would say, no, they're not out of the question. I would say, first of all polls show you that almost 70% of Israelis right now, which was not before that, prioritize hostages before the total victory, whatever that means, the total victory. So first of all, I would say the following. The big Israeli base since the first agreement is there.
You're saying in November or in...
No, the
most recent one.
The most recent one.
Most recent.
Since then. No, before then I think it was more debatable. But I would also say that also since Sinwar was killed, there's a understanding more and more for that. So first of all, we say, look, we raise our voice for prioritizing, not in all cost, very important, not in all cost, but prioritizing the hostages. Now, what if you disagree with that? It is okay. The hostage issue specifically is a Greek tragedy. What's the right decision there? I think it is very, very difficult because until Sinwar is killed, for me, for example, I prioritize them the same, on the same level. Some decisions are very hard decisions because of that. So I actually think that's a main topic, which hopefully will be solved in the next few months. And I think there is no problem in the world that you will sit under the same political umbrella and that you will say, I want either this or that. But if you say my top priority is to inhabit Gaza with Jewish settlements, even if the Israeli society is against it, then you're probably not a part of the big Israeli base. Or if you say, I want tomorrow a Palestinian state, you're not a part of the big Israeli base.
And you're trying to find where the Israeli base is, the vast majority.
Look, the opposite. We're trying to say what we stand for, and we have the leadership of the movement is 300 very diverse leaders. So we try to create broad consensus to say what we stand for, and then we say, you're welcome, read it. We're a movement that will say what we're for, not what we're against. In Israel today, and I think also in America, you will hear mostly who's out. And we're saying, no, look, we have 6 core values, for example. These are 6 core values. Do you agree with them? You're welcome. If you don't, it's a bit more difficult here.
So I want to shift to talk a little bit about, Israeli society more generally outside of the specific question of this war. What do you look for in deciding which Knesset party to vote for?
Which what? Which
Knesset party. You don't say which one you're voting for unless you want to. But what are the things that you're considering when you're deciding?
In the past.
Sure. Or if there are elections tomorrow.
Okay. If there are elections tomorrow, I'm a part of a very important phenomena that probably whoever is interested in Israeli politics in America should know that and should know it also. When you ask Israelis now, and it doesn't show on the polls, what do you want to vote for? 19% will say, I don't know. Now, this is very, very important. Because I don't know, it doesn't mean I am thinking, am I going to vote Gantz or Bibi or... No. I don't know. I have no one to vote for. Usually it's 6 to 7% in Israel. It means it's almost 20%. It means 20 to 24 mandates. It means the biggest party right now in Israel is people who have nobody, to vote for. That's the big phenomena. That's where I am, okay? I just don't have a sense of belief in the current leadership, on the coalition and the opposition. For sure, the government that brought us to this internal affair, and then this is the government of October 7th. You can't whitewash it with all the achievements that it have. At the end of the day, if you don't take responsibility for that, what do you take responsibility for? And an opposition that I just don't understand what is actually offering me instead. So I'm embarrassed like many Israelis. That's why we think also, and we are also keeping the door open for something in the spirit of Rivon as newcomers, the alliance of new players in Israeli politics for the next elections. So I would say I want honest leadership, I want clear direction, and I want that the voice would be voice of unity. I don't see it in all three of them right now. And by the way, we want to see new faces. We're with these leaders between 10 to 30 years already. Come on, let's see newcomers.
Which is more important for Israel, Judaism or democracy?
Why is that an important question? Why do you need to create a hierarchy?
Well, I'll tell you, because I think that for many people, the two often come into conflict in different ways. And part of the identity for Israel that people are grappling with is what should take priority, the democratic nature or the Jewish nature?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll say the following. I think Judaism is in the top, but I think it's a lie that you need to choose. So I'll explain. So I wanted morally to answer what my opinion is, but I think people want you to choose as a part of an agenda, okay? This is a Jewish state. It was established as a Jewish state because of our historical ties to this land, and because post-Holocaust and post-exile of Israelis from Arab countries, we understood that the Jews need a haven. So the identity, or we don't have another Jewish state, so the Jewish identity and what we call Shersheret Hadorot, the chain of generations, is a huge responsibility. And the second thing is that, and once again, this responsibility is not only for the existence, but actually to be Or LaGoyim. Actually, we have something to say to the world. We, as an historical power, I'm now talking even to seculars, as an historical power, the Judaism has something to say to the world. And by the way, some of the seculars get intimidated. Why do we need to be so with such pride and so on? I also say to them, I don't care. The Dutch also can say whatever they want, and the Swiss, and we have something to say in history. So we better keep the chain of generations, and we better keep this as a state that is Or LaGoyim, that and also this is haven. So that's why the essence was a Jewish state. But it means nothing if in the Jewish sovereignty there's Jewish superiority, although there are non-Jews in Israel. And there are different types of Jews. That's why when you read the Scroll of Independence, you see, so democracy is not mentioned there, but it doesn't matter. Because what matters there is actually the dialect, which is a Jewish dialect historically. Liberalism, a lot of the liberalism is based on Judaism, okay, on freedom, and Moses, and so on. So I just differ from the notion that Judaism and democracy does not go together. It does go together. It needs to go together. The friction is who we are. And there are places where, yes, it creates very, very high friction. But once we will try to take them apart, like this government tried to do and prioritize, or like now some people from the opposition says, democracy about Judaism, they don't work together, I think that's the end of the state of Israel.
So do you think that Israel should treat its Jewish and non-Jewish citizens the same?
Absolutely. Besides Chok HaShvut, okay? How do you translate Chok HaShvut?
The
Law of return?
Yeah, law of return.
Okay, the law of return, which actually, I argue with Israeli Arabs, it doesn't affect you because it's only for people who do not live in Israel, okay? Here, I think this is the Jewish state. It's a haven. As I said, I want also all Jews, even if they're secure, to be in Israel. That's where we differ from non-Jews. Besides that, I think this needs to be an equal state. Now, still, most democracies in the world are ethnic democracies. I think it's a lie to say that
What do you mean by an ethnic democracy?
ethnic democracy is that their symbols and a lot of their habits are based on either a specific religion or nationality. So being Catholic in Poland, it's a part of the identity. You know what? I lived when I did my PhD, I wrote my PhD in London. I sang, I didn't sing, let's be frank, but my Jewish friend sang God Save the Queen back then. Who's the Queen? She's the head of the Anglican Church, okay? And Jews, Muslims, and Christians sings that because it's clear. It's an all-state country, but it's a Christian country, okay? Based Christian. So it's a lie to say that you cannot actually have Jewish symbols. I think the public sphere has to have Jewish tradition within it. The flag is the Star of David. All these can be kept, but still, on citizenship, I see no reason why an Arab is different than a Jew.
So what do you think Arabs or Palestinians who are Israeli citizens misunderstand when they question the democratic nature of Israel?
No, first of all, some of the things they don't misunderstand. Okay, they see at the end of the day their lives, day-to-day basis, and I think. But so let's you know what? Let's unpack it. They misunderstand because they think that a Jewish democratic state is not a term. It's an oxymoron. It can't live together. And they're wrong. As I said, they don't interpret the term democracy as or liberal democracy as we think of it. They live together, and they think that a minority, their 20% minority, should not, for example, in symbols, it should not dictate the symbols for the 100% if they're only 20%. So, and of course, there could be one Jewish state in the world. They're a minority, so they, as a liberal democracy, they should get all the rights. But this doesn't mean the state should subordinate itself equally in symbols, in ethos, in everything, to the fact that there are minorities, but there's a big majority as all democracies. That's where they misinterpret the fact that this could be a Jewish democratic state. Where I hear them is where some of them, and polls show that 40% of them say, some of the activists in our movement, okay, Jewish democratic state, amen. But now what about our full rights? Why do our villages look like they're 50 years behind? When there is the issue of organized crime within Arab villages, they're dying there. Why aren't we solving it? If it was in Jewish villages, we would solve it much faster. So there are issues.
But the issues are not necessarily the ideal. Those are issues that any society has to deal with and work to solve.
But if I would be an Arab, I would say, wait, is it a coincidence that my education system is has much lower grades than the Jewish one? I would say, guys, solve it. So yes, that is a mishap. You know what? That is a moral problem for the Jewish state. We can't stand it. We can't live with it. And I understand it's difficult because Arabs of Israel, some of them identify themselves as Palestinians. In my mind, they have a right to if they want to. We're fighting their brothers and sisters. And I think it's a just war. That combination is lethal. So it is complicated. But we need to solve it because I think we did not wait 2,000 years for sovereignty to have second-grade citizens here. Not that I think they're second-grade citizens, but 1.5. We need to achieve more with the Israeli Arabs.
What role should the Israeli government have in religious matters?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I would say this. First of all, the goal, I think, of Israel needs to be more Judaism, less compulsory. Meaning that we want to open the hearts of people to Judaism. I want to see it more and more. but we want to less impose Judaism as the establishment does right now. So do you ask me, should state and synagogue, state and religious be separated? I don't think in the Jewish state that should be a goal. I in fact like the combination, but it has become, it has been tormented by the religious establishment. It's a lot about power. It's a lot about money. The fact that many Israeli seculars in nowadays do not want to get married through the rabbinate is a big shame. And it doesn't have to happen, because an organization like Tzohar proves that if you actually don't do it for political power, if you don't actually take these positions, if you actually create access for people to Judaism, they will react to it differently. So I would do a huge reform in the rabbinate, a huge reform on the status quo of state and religious, but I would not fully separate, because I think it is important in the Jewish state that there will be a combination between state and religious.
On the topic of Zionism, which obviously plays a huge role in Irvin RVE and any Israeli organization, now that Israel already exists, what is the purpose of Zionism?
So I don't know if incidentally you're asking it or on purpose, but you know that David Ben-Gurion rejected the notion of Zionism once the state of Israel is established. There are famous interviews with him. He says, "I'm not a Zionist." By the way, it's just interesting for the American listeners or viewers. A part of it, he did it in order to create a provocation for American Jews who said, "We're Zionists." He said, "You're not Zionists. Zionists, you mean you're in Israel." Now, once we established the state of Israel, that was the national movement. In order to establish it, once we have it, we need to decide what happens within it. So for me, the definition of Zionism right now, Zionism is two things. One, and most of all, is actually the case for Israel in the world, meaning the legitimization of, or fighting the delegitimization of the state of Israel. I remember always I was attacked by the PSOCs, the Palestinian societies, when I was in London in my PhD in the university, and I always told them, look, if we're arguing about the borders of Israel, what is the geostrategic position of Israel in the Middle East, and so on, let's talk about everything. But if you're legitimizing the mere existence of the state of Israel, that's a red line. I think Zionism needs to bring this voice to the world. Within Israel, I think the role of Zionism is actually to talk about the outskirts of Israel. What happened in the south, in the north. Zionism always thought about the outskirts, so that's, I think, a lot of Zionism. Beyond that, I think Zionism needs to talk about not Zionism, but rather how this becomes Medinat Mofet, how this becomes a state which is Or Lagoim, which all the world looks upon to it, and that's a Jewish democratic state. We're now Israelis. We need to make this place the best in the world. So Zionism is an important notion to keep us here, to fight our case in the world, to inhabit and to keep our outskirts. And beyond that, we need to actually decide what does this state look like in the future. And
do you agree with Ben-Gurion? Do you think that all Jews should live in Israel?
You want to get me in trouble? Yes, and. Okay, I'll explain. Yes, I think, but you know what? Not as preaching. I wish we would be worthy as the state of Israel, as Israelis, to the point that all Jews would say, wow, I want to be there. Not in quality of life, but rather that's where things are done. That's where my Jewish identity in a broad sense could actually be fulfilled. Yes, I'm connected to this. This is a state I want to be in. I think that's a desire that I will always have as an Israeli, and I will fight for it. I want every Jew in the world to come to Israel. On the other hand, I can't imagine the Jewish existence without the Jewish diaspora. Because I think if you look at history, now look, Jewish diaspora, that I also tell my Haredi friends, for the first time in the world, the state of Israel, the Jews of Israel, will be the ones who will save or keep the chain of generations, because diaspora is shrinking. First time in the world. Always diaspora kept us alive. Why is diaspora important? Because I think one is the obvious. It protects Israel in the world. But beyond that, I think much beyond that, I think, look, we are not successful historically when we have sovereignty. Look at what happened after King Solomon. Look at what happened in the late era of the Hasmonetes. When Jews need to deal with the sewage and with spiritual, cultural writing, thinking, and text, it doesn't correlate good. So I think, and you can see it, I don't think we're in the best era spiritually and culturally in Israel. I think Jewish diaspora brings a new dimension, element, more moderate, more perspective. That's why I want everyone in Israel, but I'm glad that there is a Jewish presence around the world.
Is opposing Zionism inherently anti-Semitic?
I used to think that no, but I think it's becoming a closer and closer notion.
Why did you think no, and what changed for you?
I thought no because, look, technically, you could live in Italy and say, I think I oppose the state of Israel, but I have nothing in the world against Jews. As time went by, I understood two things. One is that if you do not recognize after the Holocaust that the Jews are not safe in anywhere in the world besides Israel, or if you know what, offer another state. I oppose it for other, but show that you recognize the Jewish, and I mean here on the negative even, the Jewish phenomena, the Jews are persecuted, and it becomes a deed. So that's one notion that I think because you do not recognize it, actually you're flirting with anti-Semitism. But it takes a step further, and you see it from October 7, where there is a combination already of actually accusing Jews, again, Zionism, the big problems of the world. For example, I gave a speech in Harvard after October 7, and the professor told me there, look, the problem with you begins in the 19th century with colonialism. You're a colonialist project. You're the forefront of the colonialism project. And suddenly you understand that, like in the Protocols of Zion, they're starting to bring all kinds of phenomenon from history and blaming Zionism on them. So there already a combination between Zionism and Judaism. And you can see more and more Jews that are persecuted because they're Jews in the diaspora, even if they're not very Zionist. So I think it's becoming an overlap, and I'm less patient to that. Anti-Zionism for me these days is almost 100% anti-Semitism.
Is the IDF the world's most moral army?
First of all, I'm biased. One, I'm Israeli. Two, I served 5 years mandatory and an officer in special forces, then 13 years in reserve. And after 10 years, I was out of the army. In this war, I was called and served for 3 months, and 2 weeks I go again. So first of all, this is my army. This is a place I grew up in. So you always need to be clear that you're biased. I don't know if it's the most moral, because I haven't been in other armies. The IDF is a very moral army. The IDF spends, you need to understand that in your education from day one, you are taught that this is an army to defend Israel. You are taught that morality is something crucial, and you are taught how to treat others and what's right and what's wrong. And I have been hundreds of times as an officer, as a platoon commander, in decisions where we decided to actually risk ourselves, as many Israelis oppose. I think it's our job to risk ourselves, but rather not to hurt citizens that are bystanders or that are not involved. So I think in the situation we are, yes, it's a very moral army. But I want people to know, for example, in the Hamas war, Hamas's main strategy is to actually fight within citizens' arena. So I ask people, why didn't the world in the 8th of October concentrate all its energy on demanding Hamas to do two things? One is actually to release immediately all hostages, and two, surrender all the heads of Hamas to Israel. If that would happen, not even one Gazian child would die. Israel would not go to war if that would happen. Where was the world there? That's a moral stand. And then they ask us, when we fight these organizations, which actually try to commit genocide, and they have hostages there. So, of course, there's going to be massive collateral damage. And I don't like talking about human beings, that some of them are innocent, as collateral damage, but that's the fact of life. That's what's going to happen. And until the world will not change its moral stand on that, then a lot of innocent people will be hurt, because Israel, we're going to protect ourselves.
If you were making the case for Israel, and as you mentioned, you find yourself having to make the case for Israel in different contexts in Israel and abroad, where would you start?
I would start with the fact there's a people that were born a few thousand years ago in the context of being a religious, a nation, and a territory, and kept ties to this land for thousands of years. And that in the modern era, while they were persecuted, even if they tried to assimilate in the modern era, it just didn't work. They wanted to come to a land which was inhabited, but was lightly inhabited, which was conquered, by the way, by a colonialist power, a Muslim colonialist power, the Ottoman Empire, and wanted to create here a state which will be a state for the Jews, but a state for all inhabitants that will actually prosper and bring prosperity and peace to the Middle East. And if you look actually with no bias at the history of the Jewish people and the history of Israel, that's actually the story. We're not perfect. We made mistakes. But if you look at mainstream Zionism, that's our compass. And that's the case for Israel. And by the way, the day the Palestinians will give up two demands, that's where everything will open up.
Which demands?
One, it's not a demand, but actually recognize Israel as a Jewish state with historical ties to the place. And two, when they will give up, it's not even the right of return. I call it the notion of return, because the notion of return is the notion of demolishing the state of Israel. They're not refugees anymore. There was one generation. It's because they did not choose the partition plan. And once they will give up that notion, which is, once again, people need to understand, the notion of the right of return means that people, October 7 is how the right of return looks like. Okay, it's not a pleasant. Let's discuss. Once these two things are given up, then it's a pragmatic conflict, which is hard to solve. But we are, for every, I think, 60 Arabs, there is one Jew in the Middle East. We're very pragmatic, peace-seeking people. We always were like this. But the Arab nations, and specifically the Palestinians, need to decide that they do not want to actually annihilate us or kick the Jews out of the Middle East. Once that will happen, everything will change.
How do you respond to critics who say that, similar to the Jewish connection to the land of Israel, which lasted millennia, and even if they were many generations behind the actual creation of the state of Israel, Palestinians feel that same sort of connection when they had grandparents, great-grandparents, and for a few hundred years, connections to the land. Do you recognize their connection to the land and their, so to speak, right to return? Or how do you, and it's more of a pragmatic concern, or even fundamentally, you don't see that they have a connection to the land?
It's not my job to actually argue that they have a connection or don't have a connection. From the 19th century, in the modern phenomenon of the nation states, a group of people that have the same language, some kind of historical ties, everybody did it, the Bulgarians, the Italians, the Greek, can ask to define themselves. So if a Palestinian says to me, I have historical ties to the land, I said, okay, welcome. Did I say? But you made a choice. That's why you don't have a right of return. In 1947, the international community offered you, by the way, very generously, because most of the world, there were tens of millions of people who were transferred to different places because they lost the war. So in 1947, you could have taken the partition plan. From 37 to 47, you had that opportunities. And you had Palestinians who said, let's take it. You had Arabs like Abdullah, King Abdullah of Jordan, said, let's take it. But you didn't take it. You went after Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was a Nazi supporter. So now there are ramifications in history to your choices. Once you didn't do it, you invaded here. You started first the civil war, and then you invaded here, and you lost the war. Once you lose the war, you don't have a right of return, okay? You don't have a right of return. And by the way, we didn't expel most of you. Most of you left because the Arab leaders said to you, we will win the war and then you will come back. That's over with, okay? That's over with. Once you will say, I have an Arab friend that says, if I give up the right of return, I will need to actually admit that we lost the war of 48. My friend, you lost the war of 48, okay? History will not go back. That's where we are right now, okay? And you need to decide, do you actually recognize that there's a Jewish state, that you have no right of return, and you want to actually figure out how we are going to live together in this land and in the Middle East? We're here. We're very pragmatic, as I said, in peace seeking. If you don't, and you want to have dreams about Palestine from the river to the sea, you will meet here an iron fist. We are not going to commit suicide again as the Jewish people.
I want to shift back to the conversation surrounding the war and Israel and Gaza and so on. Can questioning the actions of Israel's government and army, even in the context of this war, can doing that be considered a valid form of love and patriotism?
To a degree. Okay, to a degree. So of course, the clear answer is yes. Okay, because we're in democracy, we should be proud of it. I tell Israelis, democracy sucks, but I think Churchill said, I don't know if any other better version of ruling. Yes, I think tactically, strategically, I think there are a lot of mistakes being made by the Israeli government in this war. I think also tactically, or if you want to actually question some of the deeds of the IDF in specific places, I think you're more than welcomed, because this isn't democracy. Where I think you cannot drift is actually in playing the game with others, with Israeli haters, of terms like ethnic cleansing, genocide. That's a lie. I can give an example. When there was, before the last hostages agreement, there was the plan was, and it was being executed, is taking the people from the north again and the Gazians and pushing them to the south. And some of the Israelis cooperated, and Israeli said, that's for humanitarian windows, and that's for you to actually give us back our hostages. Some people said in the world, this is ethnic cleansing. But of course it's a lie, because ethnic cleansing means that you're saying you're not going to allow them ever, never to come back home, and you're going to inhabit it instead of them. And it's been proved as a lie. Once again, Israel let them go back. Now I think Israel is pushing them again to the south, because we're not getting our hostages home. Some Israelis started, not a lot, to say, okay, maybe it's ethnic cleansing and so on. And I said, no, that's a red line. You're cooperating with Israeli haters. At the end of the day, the fact that on October 7, Hamas launched an operation to annihilate the state of Israel. They thought Hezbollah and Iran are joining them. Israel. is self-defending itself. And until Hamas is in power and the hostages are there, we are fighting a just war. I think we should push much faster and much more aggressively towards a negotiation to bring back all our hostages and look to the future after that to fight Hamas. But that's a tactical question. Still, eyes on the ball. Hamas wants to annihilate us, and Israel is defending itself till this day, in my view. Even though I think we should push to the end of the war.
Can't both things be true? Meaning, when Trump presented his plan to essentially move all the Palestinians out of Gaza and then build Gaza back up, and then in some point in the future, which many people doubted, they'd be allowed to return. That received widespread support in Israel among Netanyahu and among Ben Gvir and other people in Netanyahu's cabinet. And many international law experts said that that was ethnic cleansing. So can both things be true, that Israel's war and the justice of it and then its defense, and at the same time recognizing the forces in Israeli society and in the government that are in fact trying to ethnically cleanse or trying to forcibly transfer out Palestinians?
I don't think Netanyahu is trying to ethnically cleanse. I think Ben Gvir is a big problem. I think the fact that he is our minister of police is a shame, a disgrace, because he represents Jewish supremacy, and I oppose to all of this, but he's the fringes of Israeli society. But to the Trump plan, because that's important. Look, the International Committee is so hypocrite that it makes me furious. Why? When the war erupts, for the first time in history since World War II, there are people, Gazians, that are caught in crossfire because Hamas is using them and Israel has to attack. International community historically since 45 and the UN, what's their job? Is to take refugees. That's the definition of refugees. People who are displaced because of war, and you want to bring them into zones where there are no war. But the international community did nothing for that. They want them captured for political reasons there. They decided for them that maybe Israel won't let them back. Who are you to decide that? What is this moral collapse where there are innocent Gazians that have a right at least to be offered to get out of the war zone? But no, not the Palestinians, which are not Hamas, and not the international community. All the human rights advocates did not say a word about, let's, for example, demand from Egypt to create massive tent camps for these people to save them. And by the way, why didn't they do it? Because they know Israel would defeat Hamas much, much, much faster. Not because they were afraid that Israel would bring them back. So that's one point. The fact that the Gazians are decided for by the international community what to do is a disgrace. And that's the Trump plan. Trump did not say anything compulsory. Trump said, look, Gaza is not sustainable. 2-point-something million people on a very small strip. I don't think we have a right to actually expel forcibly anyone. But Trump said, let's go to these people and ask them if they want or they don't want. I don't think that was a very serious plan, okay, as we can see. But I think it was a very legitimate statement. We need to try something else because the alternative is that they're there. Hamas and the Palestinian leaders, who are not only Hamas, are telling them, you will come one day back to Haifa, to Tel Aviv, So they have, from childhood, we see with their books, there's one dream in Gaza: to annihilate the state of Israel, to kill as many Jews as you want. Is that a sustainable story? And I'm sure that there are people who can take a different track, but the international community is not allowing that. So no, I don't think you can actually say that, and that Israel is committing ethnic cleansing. I just don't think so. Now, if Israel will start inhabiting Gaza, you will see me, the first, demonstrating and saying, what the hell are you doing? Okay?
What do you think is the most legitimate criticism leveled against Israel today?
Today?
Yeah.
From the international community. Look, I think that people are questioning the motivation of the Netanyahu administration to come to any kind of agreement. Why? I'll show one point that I understand that. We signed a hostage, a two-phase or a three-phase hostage deal. The second phase, what we're negotiating, the end game in Gaza. Now, I don't think as many Israelis that these negotiations would have led to a all-inclusive deal, meaning all hostages are home, we have a solution for Gaza and so on, because I think Hamas would not allow that. But Netanyahu didn't create a chance, an opportunity even for that, because he bailed out of that. And I think that's where the criticism says, at least try to go to an end game negotiation for the war. If it doesn't succeed, then, okay, point out what are you exactly talking about. Once again, I don't think it would necessarily, I think it's a 5% to succeed. So I think people are questioning the motivations. What are you actually doing? And as I said, with Netanyahu, I'm not sure there's a grand strategy there. I think buying time is more the strategy.
Do you think peace between Israelis and Palestinians will happen within your lifetime?
I think, first of all, that morally, peace has to be an ideal. Jews without the aspiration of peace are not Jews, okay? We are talking in our scrolls. Wherever you go, you find the word peace. You find the aspiration for peace. So first of all, I think that's why I say once the Palestinians will recognize the state of Israel and historical ties, that's very important, and will give up the notion of return, then we can actually achieve peace. It will take a few years. I think, unfortunately, it might take a generation. So I'm 51. Generation is 25 years. And it might happen.
By the end of the century of Israel.
Yeah, it might happen. It will happen only if we will be very clear of our compass and not give in to any lies of let's do an agreement here, but they don't recognize. Let's keep that to it won't work. Once and for all, every day, a prime minister in Israel should wake up and say, Palestinians, hello, good morning. Did you today recognize the Jewish state? And did you give up the right of return? If yes, we're here. Once we will do that, we will be very clear that we aim for peace, and we will create that's maybe the most important, a moderate axis in the Middle East. Actually, from India to Greece, we can actually create a line of countries, some of them Christian, one of them Jewish, some of them Muslims, led by Saudi Arabia, which will create a different dynamic. Parallel to that, the aspiration for peace and what we're saying we demand from the Palestinian. Parallel to that, a very firm battle against terror and against all, not waiting for Hamas to attack, we attack. And creating a Palestinian autonomy as much as we can in order to better the life conditions, but nothing beyond that. Until they recognize, I think this 25 years could actually create here a opportunity or the conditions for peace. So that's a long answer for, because it's complicated.
What do you think should happen with Gaza and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict after the war?
Eventually, Gaza should be de-radicalized, okay? And I think there are two crucial things for the mid and long term. Whoever controls the cement will control security, I'll explain it in a moment, and whoever will control the stories will actually control the narrative. So what is the cement? Cement is not only a symbol, it's concrete. If they built, what are they going to build? Underground Gaza or overground Gaza, which wants to be Singapore? So if you give them the cement, historically, the Qatarians, the Muslim Brotherhood, they built the underground. Underground means death. So international community, Arab moderate states, and Israel needs to control the cement. Second is the stories, education system. UNRWA should be closed. UNRWA is educating these Palestinian kids that 48 is the notion, not even 67. So the education books are crucial. So I think tactically, we might have to finish the war where Hamas is still in control, but no cement is coming in my mind. And we need some kind of parameter. And we're saying, guys, this is a ceasefire, nothing more than that. We're going to come back because right now we want our hostages. We're going to de-radicalize Gaza. If there is an alternative power that could do it right now, we would love to. I'm not sure there is, because we did not full on defeat Hamas. So tactically, we might need to compromise, unfortunately. But in the big picture, until you do not de-radicalize Gaza, you won't have peace in the Middle East.
Where do you identify on Israel's political and religious spectrum? And do you have friends on the quote-unquote other side?
I think that Israeli spectrum needs a redefinition. That's what we're trying. We need a new discourse, a new language, because what's right, what's left, people who want to really be nuanced and understand Israel today, it's sociology more than ideology. Someone for Bibi or against Bibi, that's practically how we... There is ideology, but I call it operating systems. I go to... Look, we do parlors. That's how we recruit people. I've done more...
Yeah, I've been to a parlor.
Okay, so I've done more than 400 personally in the past 3 years. I'm a volunteer. I see all Israelis. And I see different operating systems. I see many religious Israelis that are actually more liberal than what they think. And I see many Tel Avivians who are actually more traditional than what they think. So I think we need to redefine what's left, what's right, what's center. I think in order not to be too cute, people will define me as center, okay? But not a compromise center. I think that we could, as we say in Judaism, lechatchila, beforehand, we can bring great solutions, as the fourth quarter is offering a roadmap to constitutions in broad consensus that 70% of Israelis could agree upon. And it's not reacting to this offer, to that offer. It's saying this is what is right. That's the new politics of Israel. What's right for Israel? And not because you're in this tribe or this tribe, you make up your decisions on whatever you want. That's where I stand. And yes, and the fourth quarter actually contains people from all spectrums of Israeli politics, not extremists. Extremists would not find themselves there.
So politically centrist and religiously?
I have a hard time. I'm secular. I'm a proud secular, but I call it Jewish secularism. Like Chad Ha'am, he's one of the fathers of, I always say he's my Admor. Okay, he's the father of spiritual Zionism. And he was very, very clear. You know, he's the one that said more than the Jews kept the Shabbat kept the Jews. And I always tell my Haredi friends who quote this, I said, this is the most secular sentence that you will hear in the world. He meant that Shabbat is a cultural, historical phenomenon kept the Jews. And that's why we actually need to go into the future with a lot of the tradition. I believe in the Jewish tradition. So I fast, you say?
Yeah.
I fast on Yom Kippur. I fast on Tisha B'Av for some time, the time on Tanit Esther. I do the Seder. I would go 3-4 times a year to synagogue. I would not eat bread on Pesach, but and as one Israeli said, and the synagogue that I don't go to is Orthodox. Okay, that's very important for me to say. I think there is a place for secular Judaism, but Judaism in Israel that plays the friction between tradition and between progress. That's I think what we
yeah, that's good to know. But before we get to our final question, I have to ask: do you see politics in your future?
Probably yes. Okay, but not in any condition. Meaning, people who know my biography, I could have been in politics quite a few times by now. I was all my career in the civic square. That's where I best function. I have a mission, and the mission for me is to create a big Israeli base, to unite Israelis. And when we formed the fourth quarter, we said, a group of us, we'll go to politics, but only politics changes. If I join politics,
By
right?
politics, you mean enter the Knesset or try and rise?
Knesset. If I join just one party now from the yes Bibi or no Bibi, and I was offered for more, the no Bibi parties, my impact is that I think I'm a competent person, but not beyond that. I don't think the current system needs to be broken. So the fourth quarter wants to create, actually, to break the blocks, and moderate Israelis to come in to become one block, and then you can actually create, for example, a constitution and broad consensus. If we bring those conditions, yes, I want to lead there. But if not, then no, I'm not obsessed about politics. On the contrary.
So our final question, and I have a sense, I feel like I know what your answer will be. Do you have more hope or fear for Israel and the Jewish people?
Rabbi Sachs, the late Rabbi Sachs, who some people say that in the fourth quarter moon is our rabbi, he got a good definition because optimism and hope. And he says optimism is wishful thinking. It's almost a trait. And he said sometimes I'm pessimist. I see the reality. He said hope is the willingness to imagine a better future and pursue it. So I'm hopeful. I have fear, but mostly I'm hopeful. Hope means a lot of Israelis and Jews of October 8, as I heard there's a term in America, are now struggling, but are talking about, let's imagine a different reality, but also pursuing it. So I wake up every morning and once again dedicate my life to the fourth quarter movement to Israelis as a volunteer. And I see the wheels going forward. I fear that on the way, we're going to have a lot of obstacles, especially internal obstacles that affect our external ability to protect ourselves. But at the end of the day, I haven't been so hopeful in my life for the future because I think history is calling us to make significant changes in broad consensus and go to the next step of Zionism, the state of Israel, and actually Jewish relationship in the world. So yes, I'm very hopeful.
Oh, wow. Well, on that note, Yoav Heller, thank you so much for answering our 18 questions.
Thank you for having me.
How was this for you?
Fun.